I'm Eric Trommater. Thank you for listening to UK Cinema History. UK Cinema History, A Man for All Seasons, 1966, directed by Fred Zimmerman and starring Paul Scofield, Orson Welles, and John Hurt.
Okay, then.
Yeah.
Perfect.
And,
So,
this is just like when we do this on Clubhouse. Nobody's here.
nobody's here. Perfect. It's just you and me again.
Oh, you, me, and the cat.
See, that's the problem. That's the problem with the world today. If people are wondering, how did we get here? This is why. Because no one pays attention to movies anymore, to history, to what these classical movies were trying to say. We are all looking for the Marvel and DC, then where heroes end up like the winners and stand on top. But like the reality is what happens to Thomas More. The reality is if you speak the truth, you're gonna lose your head. So yeah,
I know, and I see all these rooms that are so popular. I see all these rooms that are so popular about war on the Middle East and the Ukraine and things like that. What about the important things? 400-year-old martyrs in 60-year-old films. Damn it!
No, because if they would have paid attention to this, we wouldn't have those wars in Middle East. Believe me, if we have paid attention, the world would have been a better place. But sadly, no. We don't know where to pay attention or to whom pay attention to. That's the thing. I said it.
I just posted in the comments your Steve Bannon versus Orson Welles as Wolsey.
Let me see. Oh my goodness!
Yeah.
They were I mean, I said it on Clubhouse. I said I started like the movie started. I was looking at Orson Welles, and I was keep asking myself, like, how is this even possible? The dying Wolsey with like Orson Welles that he used to put on his own makeup. Like this huge Orson Welles about to die. His last breath looks exactly like Steve Bannon. And by the end of the film, all I was doing was trying to find like parallels and similars to the characters, and I showed you some of them. Sadly, there are many. Like you can find many. By the King Henry the 45th to Steve Bannon, they were all there. All of them. Yeah.
Well, one of the few downsides of HD TV and 180 pixels and all, or 1080 pixels and all of that, is you can actually kind of see Orson Welles' makeup now, where you couldn't on the older versions of this film. I could especially like see it around the eyes and things like that, but it didn't ruin it for me. But gosh, what a gorgeous, gorgeous film this is, and that getting to see it now in HD, just how beautiful it is. I think this and when we discussed Caravaggio are probably the two most beautiful films that we've done in terms of just
weren't they? These colors, the Technicolors. They're Technicolors, right? Both of them.
Yeah, they were. No, Caravaggio was shot at 8mm and then blown up to 35 off of video. That's how he achieved that effect. But that neither here nor this was in Technicolor. And it's interesting that Zimmerman started out as a documentary filmmaker, and most of his films are actually quite documentary. Like if you think of High Noon, If you think of um, what was the one with Edward Fox?
Uh, uh,
Um,
from Here to Eternity.
oh yeah, From Here to Eternity. No, Day of the Jackal. I was thinking Day of the Jackal.
Oh,
You
The
know,
Day of the
uh,
Jackal.
uh,
Yes, yes, yes.
yeah,
Also,
but
Julia, right? Julia is also a bit
yeah, Julia.
documentary.
Yeah,
It has
yeah,
a documentary look.
yeah. hmm yeah. But it is interesting that my two favorites so far of what we've done were this and Caravaggio because they're both biopics, and I hate biopics as a genre normally. Like they had to drag me to go see Bohemian Rhapsody, and and then I hated them for making me go see it. But I guess I get go, but I've seen a Man for All Seasons in the dozens of times, at least 24 times. Over the years. So it is maybe Daniel, our good friend Daniel Kickheffer over at Understanding Movies is correct in that genre is just an irrelevant concept.
It's a beautiful because it is beautiful and it is not a biopic. I mean, I beg to differ. You tell us, like, indulge us, Eric. Tell us a bit about like, is it how historical accurate the movie is?
Beckett, which was based on a John and No play, was what I would call historically inaccurate. That is to say that a No didn't know the facts and just made his own facts up. So that is a historical inaccuracy to me. This film, Bolt knew the facts, but changed them dramatically. And to me, that's just poetic license, you know? And there's a huge difference because when you know the facts, you're telling the same story. You haven't changed things the way being historically inaccurate does, the way, say, a Braveheart does. So to go through, I'm going to sound like I'm nitpicking, but for starters, okay, Thomas and Richard Rich were not friends in real life. They did not know each other, really. Um, Richard had worked as the Duke of Norfolk's librarian. Thomas did not introduce them to the Duke of Norfolk. None of that is true. However, he did know of him because in his final testimony, uh, when Richard Rich commits perjury, he does say, "I've known you as a lad since you were a lad to be a baddie," basically. And I'll have that quote later when we discuss that scene because I actually wrote down what he originally said versus what he says in the film and the play. But so that's not a historical. Pardon me. That's not a historical inaccuracy, so to speak. That is a poetic license. He is simply reshaping the narrative to make it more dramatic and to reinforce the theme. Because the theme that goes through this is Thomas refuses to perjure himself by taking the oath to make his life more comfortable, whereas Richard perjures himself and for that is put in charge of Wales. And to make that seem more of a betrayal, we have Thomas More as sort of a mentor figure to Richard. So that would be the biggest historical inaccuracy. But again, it's not inaccurate more than it is just kind of a playing with the figures. Another one that's going to sound rather nitpicky is that Thomas's son-in-law uh, uh, did not, Will Roper, I'm sorry, did not convert to or flirt with, I guess, Lutheranism until after he had married Thomas's daughter. But that again is changed for dramatic purposes, and also so that we get a sense of Thomas's reasoning for hating Lutheranism. It's a lot easier to explain that. No, you can't marry my daughter until you're no longer a Lutheran than it is to explain after the fact. But in reality, because a lot of this was based on Will Roper's accounts of Thomas's life, that was actually a rather a large point. For about a year, Will Roper and Thomas didn't speak, and Will Roper hated him almost irrationally. And part of Will Roper's version of events that this is based on was his kind of accepting the guilt that his flirtation with Lutheranism had brought that rift between him and Thomas, and not feeling 100% like he had ever fully reconciled with him. That's a small inaccuracy. Other than that, it's pretty on the nose in terms of historical facts. Now, Wolsey is made out to be a completely different figure than he was in real life. But he's not on screen enough that you could actually kind of get a full picture of him, and you are seeing him through Thomas and the Duke of Norfolk's point of view at that point in time. And Norfolk was Wolsey's sworn and bitter enemy, and he and Anne Boleyn had actually been the ones who brought Wolsey down. Now, when it comes to the treatment of Cromwell, I'm going to go on and on about this later, because we're going to compare this a little bit to Wolf Hall. But let's just say that for convenience sake, an over-the-top baddie was needed for this, and Cromwell is filling that role for now. But that his motivations really aren't shown here, and so that's not a historical inaccuracy. But what it is giving you a sense of him as just kind of a slimy character, when in fact he was actually a very deeply motivated character, and there were a lot of reasons why he did what he did that we'll get into when we're discussing the films. But when it comes to Wolsey, this is a hagiography of Thomas More, and to lionize someone, whoever is the cause of his destruction is going to have to be portrayed as the bad. It's just the way literature works, you know. And in Wolf Hall, you know, fair dues, it's reversed, and Moore becomes the over the top baddie, and Cromwell becomes the saintly one. And in Wolf Hall, you see Cromwell is motivated because, number one, he was so devoted to Wolsey, and that when Wolsey fell, he felt that Moore was complicit in his fall and had taken his place as chancellor, and had conspired with Anne Boleyn and with the Duke of Norfolk, who was a very close friend of Thomas More. So this is believable. Whether or not it's true, we don't know, but we don't know it's not. But fair dues. So if you're gonna make Cromwell your hero, you have to make Moore your villain. And so, as we're going to discuss, you know, in Wolf Hall, Moore has to become this anti-Protestant burner at the stake, etc., etc., you know, which has its own series of historical inaccuracies, or at least things that we don't know. So, but I'm willing to give this a pass on the historical accuracy. It is a lot more accurate historically than most other movies. So, but question for you, Yassi, did it feel accurate? Because I think that's much more important. Did you feel like this was the real
exactly what
story.
this is. You read my You read my mind. This is exactly what I wanted to say. I wanted to say that movie has a very amazing way to say, to to talk about the uh like to say if it wants to be accurate or take a point of view towards the the history itself. We what happens in the in the film is we see a lot of overhearing, like at the beginning of the film, almost at the beginning, we see like people in the kitchen in Moore's household. They're talking, they're like uh bad mouthing Anne Boleyn. They're talking about the king. It's like history is shaping itself, but how? In the kitchen. It's like in the form of gossip, in the word of mouth. And it keeps repeating in the movie. We see it more. Like again, when at that wonderful scene when Moore and King Henry VIII are talking outside the mansion in the garden, we see people inside again. They're like overhearing, that conversation. It's and and like Cromwell,
I
he's
have
trying to.
no queen. Catherine is not my wife. No priest can make her so. And those who say so, not only liars but traitors. Thomas, traitors.
Thomas, and that's amazing. We see, that I think I found that very fascinating, that how the history is like, it's like a game of telephone words, like and you see what is again more fascinating is in like the Hilary Mantel book series, is you see here we see Cromwell as the villain, as the antagonist. But what she does in her books is that she takes a very different, it's kind of like a more like more sympathetic toward Cromwell than
Yeah, it's a
uh,
hagiography of Cromwell. The only consistent character in both is Richard Rich, who's a scumbag in both. Which there's an open opportunity. There hasn't been a hagiography of Richard Rich yet, so
yeah.
Yassi, maybe we should go work on revitalizing his reputation. After all, he's the man for all seasons of the title, is he not?
Yeah, you're right. But that that that's what I was saying. Yeah, this is, I think, to me, when we go back and look at like Middle Ages, like history in general is fiction. Is his We call these historical fictions, but almost like before, like to these are not, none of these. There is a biased look towards narration of the history, I think. And that's what is very well portrayed in this film, because the focus is not on historical fact. I think the focus is on the the character of Thomas More, and how he, and how he's the man of principle, and his like ethics and his morality, and not just morality toward Christianity, his like loyalty to God or to the king. What we see, like through all the dialogues that he has throughout the film, whether like his when he talks about the evil, and when everyone's warning him that you have to get rid of Richard, that beautiful monologue when he starts talking about the
Well,
devil.
now let's talk about that scene for a moment, and then we're gonna talk about what's great about this film, because that scene to me when I first saw it, really confused me back when I was, whatever, 13 years old and saw this film for the first time. Because I could not understand the hostility toward Richard from the beginning when he enters, because he's there to tell him that Cromwell has been basically spying on him. And he could not account, you could not account for yourself even for tonight, Thomas says. And I sense that I am not welcome. Why, Richard, have you done something to make yourself feel unwelcome? Except I sense that he was unwelcome, and you don't really get why, except that they just kind of know that he's a baddie. And it's a very confusing scene. And then they say, arrest that man. And Thomas said, for what? My question is, yeah, for what? For what? He came to warn you, you know, that your own servant is a spy for Cromwell, and that Cromwell is spying on you, and you know, basically made him feel unwelcome. And then when he begs him, employ me, keep me out of this, you know, you've got your what, you know, your great what if of history, of course, because then you may not have had Richard turn on him, and you may, you know, and maybe and this is something that you brought up in our clubhouse version of this, but the counterfactual would be, what if Thomas had put him to work? But that's of course the problem with counterfactuals. Thomas never would have put somebody like that to work in government because he had too much honor. But but that part of the scene confuses me.
Yeah, what I said in Clubhouse was that maybe uh, uh, Thomas More had like so much wisdom that he could see the ambition through his ambition, and he could see that even if he give him the job, the political job that he wants, maybe he still, like, you know, maybe he becomes another Cromwell, you know.
Well, I'm gonna go with a quote from real life. Now, I don't want people to who, if anybody's listening to this, to take this to say that this is a criticism of the film. It is not, because the film exists as a film, and history exists as history. If you're getting your history from movies, you're getting bad history. Period. And but I think it gives perspective on what the real Moore felt about the real Richard Rich, and makes that scene far less confusing to me now than it did when I didn't have the historical knowledge. But I'm going to read what Moore actually said at his trial about Rich after Rich perjures himself. Because he had said, can it seem therefore likely to your lordship that in so weighty an affair as this act, so unadvisedly as to trust Mr. Rich, a man I always had so mean an opinion of, in reference to his truth and honesty, that I should only impart to Mr. Rich these secrets? So in real life, he had none of this kind of mentorship toward Rich. He had always thought him to be a bad, and so the sense that you get in that room when Roper is introduced to him, says, "You've heard of me?" I can't imagine what you've heard, because you can tell by Roper's face that oh, you're that guy, you know, and so. And then it makes a lot more sense. Oh, yes, he's dangerous, but until he breaks the law. This was based on something else that Thomas More said, which is that he said if his father had a suit against the devil, and the devil was writing law, he would rule in the devil's favor. But instead, he uses that great metaphor. He talks about England being planted like trees with laws, and that the laws are man's laws are what are going to protect us. And when he says, "And what would you do, Roper? Would you cut down every law in England uh, just to get at the devil?" And he said, "Yes, yes," says Roper. I absolutely would." And he said, "And what would you do then when you had nowhere to hide because the laws are all gone?" And you can say that Bolt has done in writing these scenes, and especially in the final scene, is you actually get a sense of the real Thomas More this way. That is to say, if you, like myself, you can't read everything that More wrote in one lifetime. His shortest books run 15 volumes. You would literally have to start reading today, and you would end up still reading 10 years after you die. But I've read a lot of what he's written, and where this is a modern version of More, a post existential, post Camus, post Sartre version of More as a counterculture hero, is actually more sentiments to express that existentialism. So, for instance, when he says to Norfolk, "I believe," no, what is important, "I believe," that's the center of existentialism, the self. And his defense all throughout is that he maintains silence because no one is allowed to tell him he's not allowed to think this. And he refuses to perjure himself, his self, the existential self, by signing a document that is contrary to what he believes, what I believe, more important. And he says, "I trust I make myself obscure," which, first makes her kind of a funny line, but second, really highlights something toward the end, which is that when he does go to clarify his mind, he is still fighting for his life. He is not like Bishop Fisher was, who is mentioned throughout the. When Bishop Fisher is asked to sign the document, he says, "No, because I don't think that the king is the head of the Church of England, is countermands Magna Carta." And they say, "What if we told you that what you just said is treason? We can put you to the block." He says, "Fair dues." Fisher says, "Fair dues, great, cut my head off." And he was martyred in 1935, the exact same time as Thomas More, because that the Catholic Church finally got around to it. But More is not courting martyrdom throughout this, and we don't really know what was going on in More's head. We have his letters, we have the recollections of Will Roper, and we have, most importantly, his daughter Meg, who I think is excellently played by Susanna York, Superman's mom, in this, um, uh, which uh, give us what his arguments are against signing the document. But until that ending scene, we don't have what he is actually objecting to, and that goes to one of the criticisms. Pauline Kyle, for instance, said that it's so one-sided that you can't even understand what Moore's point of view is. Moore is just right, and everyone else is wrong. Without, well, leave it to Pauline Kyle to get the point and then not get the point.
Yeah, totally. Like you said, like this is the modern version of More, and you can't say it better. You couldn't say it better because like if we like look at it, that's what I was trying to the conversation that I was trying to have with Sela in Clubhouse, that it didn't go nowhere. Like, I'm so glad you bring it up here because that this is what I was trying to say. I was trying to say, like, you know, if we want to look at the character of More as a pacifist, And then it how can we look at him as someone who took action? I mean, how far, you know, what kind of morality is this? This is not Nietzsche kind of morality. This is not Kantian kind of morality. This morality that you lose your head for it, you know.
Well,
But
there's a central hypocrisy at the center of this, isn't there? Then,
but
if you
but
take
who
if you take that vantage point, which is he is relying on the maxim of the law that silence means consent, right?
but to me there is more like a kind of naivete. He's so
Well,
naive that he
I do have an explanation for that, and it isn't naivete, but I'll mute and listen to yours.
I think the fact that he, how can I say it? Like, is is it out
He
of
does
fear? Is his
he doesn't realize the game is fixed.
fear?
He doesn't realize that the game is fixed.
What it reminded me of the Killers of the Flower Moon, and when Leonardo DiCaprio's wife, she couldn't believe, she couldn't bring herself up to believe that her husband is capable of doing this much evil, or like to go that far. And I think, to me, that is kind of what happened with Moore. He's such a good man, and he's like beliefs are so strong that he doesn't want to believe the corruption, the level of corruption, or he, maybe he's trying to teach the king a lesson. Wants to like
Well,
he
in real life though, the judges actually at Thomas's trial were one of his most bitter enemies, the new Lord Chancellor Thomas Audley, um, Thomas Howard, who is Anne Boleyn's uncle.
Mhm.
Um, his one friend was the Duke of Norfolk, and Thomas Boleyn, his father, and her brother George Boleyn were the judges in the case. So he knew
Mhm.
that it was fixed in real life. But of course, we don't see that. We see only Wolsey passing it on to the jury. He says, and but but Moore does say, "Oh, I'm a dead man. It's fixed." And that's why Wolsey says in the film, the jury shouldn't have to retire. In real life, they took 15 minutes to convict him, which again, I don't consider that an inaccuracy. We just didn't need to have the scene of, them retiring for 15 minutes.
Mhm. Yeah, but the point that I wanted to get to was that uh you said the Sartrean kind of existentialism. It is, because in Sartrean kind of morality, he looks at it totally different. He, like Sartre says, that this type of morality in society is like a tool to control the actions, you know, to like uh,
Well, let's talk about that
to
ending scene. Let's talk about that ending scene for a minute because it is, I think, brilliantly written, brilliantly acted, and brilliantly directed. Because Moore is not martyring himself at this point. He is not actually relieving himself of his mind. When you
no,
hear
he's
what he is saying, he is still
yeah,
fighting for his life. He is
to the eye.
stating that this is an illegal law and you cannot enforce it, despite it being on the books. It's an ex post facto law because it was written after he was put into the tower. He points that out, and that no matter whether Parliament passed it or not, he he says that you can't. It goes against the opening of Magna Carta, which is that the church shall be free. Now, in real life, he did say that. However, Magna Carta was kind of not given the weight we give it today at that time.
Mhm.
Uh, but if you listen to he's not unloading his mind. It is a very complex legal trick to convince these judges, hey, if you enforce these laws, and he says this to Cromwell, you're next. Death comes to us all, even kings. And there's always the reminder, that when Henry VIII first came to power after the death of his father, he had two of his father's most hated ministers put to death the next year, and had them locked up immediately. Which you have to put it into perspective that when Norfolk is giving him the offer of the king's gracious pardon, you know, at the end of Henry's life, he has Norfolk put away, and Norfolk put away, and he's going to have him killed. And he's only saved by the king's death in real life. Now, did the king die of syphilis? Probably not. Another historical inaccuracy, but that one I'll grant him, because that was what was thought because of the ulcers on his legs. We have a better medical. We know now that he probably did not die of syphilis, but he did die, and that's what saved Norfolk's life. And he is pointing out that any one of them could be next under these laws. And so this is not him opening his mind. This is not him martyring himself. This is him stating the same thing he said all the way through, which is, you cannot legally do this. You cannot kill. Because it was.
It's true.
You're gonna have to repeat that. Either I or you had an internet clip there. I'm sorry. Repeat that.
No. I said he thinks that he has the upper hand because he legally he knows the law, and what he doesn't think is that he is like he's facing this.
The fix is in.
This psychopath of a. He doesn't think that what's going to happen if you have a baby as a king, like a baby that stomp his feet, and I said, no, I want another wife. No, I don't want. I want to.
Well, like I mentioned before, 2 days after he was coronated, Henry had Richard Evanson and Edmund Dudley, who is, of course, the father of the famous Dudley, whom Elizabeth had the long relationship with, but had them both charged with high treason and executed in 1510 for enforcing his father's laws. So the precedent had been set. Now, so when he says death comes to all, even kings, that's a warning. Like, you are enforcing illegal. If you're enforcing illegal laws by the king, the next king may not agree with that, and you will be on the same scaffold that I am if you do this to me. So he is still fighting for his life in both the play and the film. Now let's talk just briefly.
Let's put a pause here and go back to the scene where Robert Shaw, because we're talking about Henry VIII and his law. Let's talk about the fact that in the movie, we only hear about a king who wants to get another wife, and we only hear these names. When we don't see them, we don't see this king, 45 minutes in the movie. And then we see him for the first time where on the river, which I think is beautiful symbolism, beautiful visual storytelling, that look at this king coming to the Moore house on the boat, in the water, in the river.
Before we go to this scene, let's talk about the river as the metaphor of this film, because of course this is based on a stage play, and one of the ways that Zimmerman is able to open up is the river being that connection between Chelsea, where Moore is, and all of the places that he go, and the opening scene of the note, where some Wolsey giving the note to Cromwell, and Cromwell having the note delivered by boat, the boat coming, and then the boat taking, uh, then the conversation, the boat, and that gives you your sense of the passing of time, you know.
Yeah. Let's
And then
like
when the king brings that same river, but the river is really a central metaphor for this, because because it becomes almost like a spider web, you know, that everyone that all your characters are connected by, through the
exactly.
times.
So how beautiful is that we see our king for the first time on this river that you just said and explained. So he
With a
enters
full orchestra and surrounded by lackeys. And what's the first thing that happens when he jumps off the boat?
by lackeys, exactly. And it looks like a party.
And he gets
Anyway,
covered in mud. He gets covered in mud.
yeah, we
Look,
get a
mud.
party barrage. So they enter, and and then because of the tide and all that, so he gets out and he steps into the mud. Oh, and who is our king?
And they all
No,
go dead silent. It's such a great scene. And this is
wait.
not in the play. This is not in the play at all. This is
Robert
totally
Shaw.
created for the film.
Let's talk about Robert Shaw. Robert Shaw, that we know as Robert Shaw in Sting, Robert Shaw in From Russia with Love, Robert Shaw that we know from Jaws. Robert Shaw is our
Yes,
Henry.
Robert Shaw, who couldn't stay sober for long enough to film his scenes on this, which turned out to be very good for the
Like,
film,
tell me,
because
I
the
don't know
less
that.
you see of him, more the better, or the less you see of him, the better. I think. You
Oh,
know,
so really drunk at that time.
um, yeah, they had a hard time. He was sober during the scenes that they filmed, um, but that little scene at the wedding that they did, he was not. With the cameo appearance by Vanessa Redgrave
But
as
yeah.
Anne Boleyn, he was drunk off his ass, and that's why. And they had dialogue for that scene, and they took it out because there was absolutely nothing. So they just had him sing that song in kind of a Welsh accent.
So look,
Or
because how
but I'm not as big a fan of Shaw's performance in this film as most people are,
oh,
honestly.
so
But I
let
think
me
it's perfect for the amount of time it's on screen. But if he had been
let
like Peter O'Toole
just
in Beckett, I think it would have just been too much. Just too much scenery getting chewed.
this is exactly what I wanted to say. I wanted to say, like, how many documentaries about the life of Henry VIII have you seen or you known about? A lot. Like a lot. From TV series to BBC documentaries to American
Oh
documentaries.
yeah,
The
the world has Tudor mania right now. Yes, absolutely. You
thing,
can't you can't swing a dead cat without hitting a Tudor document.
yeah. So what I thought, like when I was watching the film, I thought like why they haven't switched these, like why they haven't put Orson Welles as Henry VIII and Shaw as Wolsey. But then I remembered that this is Henry VIII. I mean, Shaw depicts Henry VIII at the height of his youth. This is the
This is a
very,
young, yeah. This is he was in his
young.
late 30s, but yes. But yes. This is a younger. This isn't the fat, decrepit, and the degrading of the king's character, as they called it, hadn't occurred yet. That was all after Anne Boleyn, after 1536, uh, when he had the
Exactly.
accident that injured his leg. This is still
Yeah.
1529 Henry VIII.
So this is, but this is still the incredibly boisterous, breezy, childish, like Henry VIII. with all
And
these like.
who is it that exposes that but Meg, our beloved Susan York, Superman's mom, as
Jesus.
Thomas's daughter, who,
Yeah. So
and this is
yeah,
completely historically accurate because he had Thomas More had
wait,
four children,
of
three
course.
daughters, and a son, and he educated his daughters the same as he did his sons, or his
Yeah.
son. He believed in educating women, and he was the first nobleman in England to do so.
No,
And he
before.
so impressed Erasmus. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Look, before we get to that, we let's not forget about the most important scene in the film, the mud scene. So we have like the king steps into the mud, and all the entourage and lackeys, they all kept quiet. And tell me if you didn't think of Great Race
Gasp of
and Jack
fear,
London.
feared
Have
silence.
you seen the Great Race?
Fear, gasp of yes.
He is, because in that scene he also plays like two characters, and he plays a prince, and then there is this exact kind of same scene that he does something goofy, and then the audience, the people there, they don't know what to do, and he as a prince screams laugh, and they all start laughing, just like here. No one knows what to do. The fear that this psychopath
Which
man child of a king.
and this leads to his talking to Moore, his one advisor who will give him good advice and won't just do what and doesn't just live in fear of him. You know, um, and yes, and without that
Right.
scene, which is not in the play, this is totally for the film. Without that scene, you don't get quite as well as you do in the film. And I've seen the play performed several times. Plus, I saw Charlton Heston's version of it. Actually, quite recently because it was free on YouTube. Which is how I rate a movie. Is it free on YouTube? No. And this one wasn't. That they lost us stuff. But all joking aside, when he's talking about because you're honest and you know, and there are those who follow me because because they're lying and they are jackals looking to prey corpses and all of that. You get that visually in that scene, and
Exactly.
it's set up for you. So you can understand why it's so important that he gets Moore on his side, because without Moore, then he is in danger of making a bad decision because nobody's actually giving him any advice that can contradict him.
He
Moore is
knows
the
that.
only one.
He knows that. The way that he speaks to Moore, I think he kind of sees him as his like kindred spirit. He knows that he's not just
Oh, I'm
another
so
yes
glad
man.
you said that, Yassi. I'm so glad you said that because there are too many versions of the more Henry VIII dynamic that have it like a father-son relationship. And this film and the play that Bolt wrote before it, and even the radio play, you don't get that sense of it. You get the sense of Henry looking at him as maybe an equal intellectually, but he not actually admiring Moore's intellect, despite the fact that in real life Moore was
Madam President.
England's top intellect. He was known throughout Europe.
Di una
And his
crisi molto
longtime
molto
friendship with
grave. Insomma, mi
people like
pare che
Erasmus as
la
the top intellect in England. There were people who knew who Thomas More was, who had no idea who Henry VIII was, because who the hell cared who the king of some island off the coast of Europe that that where it rained all the time, was. But More because he wrote in Latin and he wrote in Greek, and because he was one of the earliest adopters of the what was called the humanist philosophy, was
Mhm.
well known. He was a rock star over there. He was the Beatles and the Stones and Oasis all rolled into one. Mm,
The way that he speaks to his family about art and music, you see exactly. So they, as you said, he enters the, like, he comes after that moth scene. We see the Moore family welcoming him, and how beautiful that dialogue between Margaret and Henry VIII is. They start that Latin conversation, impeccable. And then the way that the king, I was trying to like talk about this with Sila. I said, like, do you think that, I mean, he said that, I mean, to my eyes, that was how he, I mean, the the atmosphere of the era was the way that they look at women, how beautifully. That is the historic part that matters to me. Like, look, even if you were a woman that educated, with that amount of knowledge, from a good family, from a good level of like class, like societal class, okay, still, still the way that they look at you is trying to belittle you, is trying to like strip you from your power and your true self, and look at you as something that only brings air to the king, or dances very well, or sings very well, or looks pretty.
yeah. I dance superlatively. The king has to have something on her. Yes, yes. Well, I speak 9 languages. Well, I can dance. That's a dancer's leg, Margaret. And that, of course, was the leg that would get injured and have the ulcers that would debilitate him the rest of his life after 1536, which I thought was a great subtle little dig. You know, that they stuck in.
and and her mother, the Alice, those that simple 5 minute like scene, that to me is the trivialization of women throughout ages, perfectly depicted there. And I love that. And comparing to Beckett and the way that women was executed on that movie, just put it here. I know that they're like age, like a century, 4 centuries different between these two movies, but still, just look at the like marginalization of women, like from then to like from the dawn of time until today. Men will flirt with you. you know you can. And what I love about this movie, the other time that we see Margaret is on that beautiful, like when there's that windy scene when he talks to his father, and that the wind, just because we talked about the like this symbol of water here, and then we see wind there, like how beautiful, like conveniently there, the wind, and everything is about to change, and that tumultuous time, and she and Moore talks to her daughter. I really like the dynamic, like when Margaret tries to stand up, when King's turns his back to her, and then he puts his hand on his head and like try to sit her down. That their dynamic is beautiful. There is like comic relief to that when she's trying to find a husband for herself, and all these relationships and dynamic in more household. That is history to me. you know the way that a scholar of a man with like morality and ethics and principles treats his daughter and son-in-law and second wife, and the way that the king of the country, the man who has all the power, like treats women. And that says a lot about why we're standing here, why like we still until today we have to fight for Roe versus Wade and women's right and equality.
Let me
Time question.
let me go back and let me go back to what I was saying about the difference between the play and the movie, and that is wrapped up in the character of Matthew, who is Thomas More's servant. He acts as a chorus or a narrator for the play, and he plays several different roles. So he is not only More's uh, servant. He's also the boatman who takes him back from when he sees Wolsey. He is the innkeeper at the inn where Richard conspires with Cromwell. He is the jail keeper. He is the executioner, and he alone is the jury that convicts Moore, with the other members of the jury being represented by the hats that he wore and his many different roles throughout the play, being the other jurors. And he will stop and break the fourth wall and explain to you what is happening from what is called the common man's point of view. And one of his opening things is that the 16th century was the era of the common man, just like every other century. And so he acts both as a narrator and also as kind of a common man stopgap on Thomas More's saintly intellectualism. But without him, we wouldn't have a sense that time has passed, because it's he who says things like, well, Wolsey died, because that happens off screen, and and or well, and when we ended Act One, he starts Act Two. He talks about Thomas More becoming the chancellor, and without him, we need something to see how time has passed. And this is where I think Fred Zimmerman gets the lion's share of the credit for this film, because all of that comes down to how he's opened it up. And I want to turn to you, Yassi, because you were very expressive about the sense of season in this and the metaphor of seasons in A Man for All Seasons.
Yeah, exact. And the way that the seasons matter here, when we are talking about the difference between play and movie, and this is where we can see the power and the touch of and kind of like author filmmaker, is how he uses the power of movie, the way and how he tries to like show the passage of time here, and with that interaction between Moore and her daughter, his daughter, in that windy scene, when like the storm, everything is about to change, and then we see Moore in that later. We see him in that prison cell, like trying to see through the crack of the wall a tree that
One of the most
symbolizes
beautiful scenes in the
the
whole
spring,
film.
one of the most beautiful scenes. And then, you know, so we see how much time has passed and how much time is, when you are living in this crazy time that not we have this crazy king that is like a young king in his juvenile. He doesn't care about time, and he has everything at his disposal. Everyone, he can do whatever he wants, so nothing matters to him, not even your life, your time. And then the other thing that I think is so beautiful is not just in this film, but uh Zinnemann as a filmmaker, he always uses time. And for example, in High Noon, the way that we the movie length is like 1 hour 35 minutes, and we are in this journey with Kane in real time, with Gary Cooper in real time. So that's how he raises the tension. Also, maybe we don't have that kind of tension here, but what we have is a man that is a man of dignity, is a man of honor, is a man that he's being his presence in the world makes changes and difference, and he's
And
loved
as
his
he wears
family.
down, we wear down with him. So the ending
Ex-
scene where he is weakened by his time in the tower, you
you know
feel the weight, the same weight that he is feeling when he's sitting in the middle of that room and his voice becomes so hoarse because you have sensed the changing of the seasons and the time that's passed. But it's also the little things, the snow, when Wolsey dies, outside the castle. The metaphor that we talked about earlier with the river, connecting everyone. You know, uh, time.
yeah,
You see the
we get
daylight
back to
to the
Wolsey.
night
We get back
hour.
to Wolsey because he is. Yeah, Wolsey is a character that we have to like give him a time, even though he doesn't have much time in the film. But he's so we have to give him time and talk about him. But let's just say and another time that we see time in like presented visually in the film. I think it's the beginning of the film. We even if we don't know anything about the time that we are in, where like where in the history we are, we just enter like blindly to the film by those gargoyles at the beginning and the atmosphere, and by
and
the
and the metaphor of the gargoyles scaring off
at
evil.
exactly, they're like scary outside but empty inside. We see that, and the irony, the seasons also kind of be time here is kind of used as an irony, I think. you know and we kind of find out suddenly, we by the costumes and by the image, the Catholic Church imagery and all those symbols, and if
Well,
we
and
find ourselves.
the opening line of the film is Moore's actual reference to his own 1521 work Utopia. And I'm trying to do this from memory, but I believe it's something to the effect of, yeah, Norfolk says something. In this country, every second bastard is fathered by a
Born by
priest.
a priest, by a
Right.
priest,
And
exactly.
Moore says, in Utopia, that could never be. And he says, why? He says, because the priests are very holy and therefore very few. But now that's the only reference to any of Moore's written works. But that's all we need to know. Oh, this is the guy who wrote Utopia. And
Exactly.
it's told without being told
No,
to us. It's respecting our
exactly.
intelligence.
We suddenly we know that where we are in the history, what and where in that certain period of time we are, and that
And that
I think
gives it, and that
is
then the Roper's flirtation with Lutheranism puts us into that too. We know then this is, that Martin Luther is still alive, so we know we're sometime in the 1520s just automatically, because if you've learned anything, you know about what would become, they didn't use the word yet Protestant, but would become the Protestant Reformation, the original Brexit, so to speak, and we know we're pre that, and we get a sense of Thomas's uh, um, virulence against Lutheranism as a heresy. Now, in real life, in his writings, Thomas More was swearing left and right. He basically said that Luther had all of his best ideas when he's on the toilet, which was great because all of his ideas were shit. I'm going to give a quote that'll kind of put into perspective. Uh, This is from Thomas More, and it's in his dialogues concerning heresies, and it's a direct repute. I'm sorry, this was from Responsio. So this would have been from 1523. So this is 6 years before. He says to Luther, "For as long as your reverend paternity will be determined to tell these shameless lies, others will be permitted, on behalf of his English Majesty, to throw back into your paternity's shitty mouth the truly the shit pool of all shit, all the muck and shit which your damnable rottenness have vomited up, to empty out all the sewers and privies onto your crown, divested of the dignity of the priestly crown, against which no less than a kingly crown you have determined to play a buffoon." And he also refers to him as an ape, as a drunkard, and points out that almost every one of Luther's supposedly great ideas came to him when he was on the toilet, and that constantly in his fights against Satan, Luther is obsessed with his own dookie snake, which he refers to by using which was just as bad a word back then as it is today, word shit. And that brings me to the next question, which is, in Paul Scofield's portrayal, what is your sense of Thomas More as a character, Yassi?
You mean Paul Scofield, the way he portrays?
Mm-hmm.
Like before that, one more thing about the time is that I wanted to say that what an interesting period of time historically, like where we are, like the the events of this uh like Church of England breaking from the Catholic Church of like Rome, and the all these things
Basically breaking
happening,
itself off from Europe altogether.
and then the what is it called, the Anglican, no, I don't know what it's called, but yeah, so and then
It is called
all this
the
like
Reformation at this point.
Protestant.
Yeah, Protestant
Yeah,
was not
Reformation,
a
and then
word that was used yet. That wasn't the Protestant wasn't used until the end of Mary's reign and the beginning of
see, and
Elizabeth.
very
But but these
this
were the people who would
time.
become the Protestants. They were at the time just called Reformers, and this was called the Reformation because their idea was not to get rid of
Einige
the
Ideen
Catholic
dazu.
Church and
Wir
replace it with a
sehen,
different
dass sie mit
religion,
der
but to
Medienmacht
reform and replace the Catholic Church.
See, very interesting. And then this renaissance of kind of humanist renaissance of sort, and the changes in the language that is happening, and that which you just said. Uh, Thomas More was so important in creating somewhere, even like the the kind of vulgar kind of language, or uh the all these changes is happening. And regarding to what you said about William Rupert and Margaret, they, as the like writing the biographers of this historic figure, what they were witnessing at the time, and that we see at the end of the film, that it's not shown, it's blocked, but we what we read, that it's written that the head of Thomas More was there at display for a month until his daughter collected the head. So you see, the way that this, I think that's very interesting period of time to be
Well, now
in.
let's now I'm gonna give you the ending of the play, which is again Matthew the common man after executing he's wearing an executioner's mask, and then he chops Moore's head off, takes his mask off, and he's revealed to be Matthew. And Matthew turns to the audience and basically sums up what he thinks the moral of the story is, which is don't make waves because you'll end up like this. And then he goes through and he points out that all of the fates of the people that Norfolk would end up in the Tower, that Cromwell would be executed for treason, but he says Richard Rich died in his bed, as did I, as I hope do all of you, and that's the end of the play. At the end of the film, we get a voiceover narrator that tells us exactly, like you said, what had happened, and then ends with, and Richard Rich died in his bed. And so Richard Rich is actually the man for all seasons of the title, in a way, because he survived not only the different machinations of Henry's reign, because Henry would become more conservative, and that's why a Protestant like Cromwell had to go, and then he would become more liberal, and that's why he locked up Norfolk, who was headed back toward the traditional church. Richard Rich would ride the tide. He would be a Catholic during Mary's reign, and then convert back to Anglicanism during Elizabeth's reign, and he was the one who survived season after season after season, whereas the people who made waves, the people like Moore, like Cromwell, who, again, we discussed when we were talking about Wolf Hall, Cromwell was someone who made major changes. The people who make major changes are not going to last the season. Now, the quote that the title "A Man for All Seasons" comes from is actually about Thomas More, and it was said in 1520. So there is an irony there. The quote was, "More is more of a man of an angel's wit and singular learning. I know not his fellow. For where is the man of that gentleness, lowliness, and affability? And as time requireth, a man of marvelous mirth and pastimes, and sometimes of sad gravity, a man for all seasons." And that was Robert Whittington in 1520. Well, he was not, but More was not a man for all seasons, because he did not survive the first winter, which was Henry VIII. And Cromwell was not a man for all seasons because he didn't survive the second. Norfolk was not a man for all seasons. He didn't survive the third. Richard Rich is the only one who survived all of it. And I think the ending of the film gets that across to us.
You know what is interesting, again, through the like his storytelling and the history part. I think I said that period of time is so interesting because we can see in Hilary Mantel's book in Wolf Hall, and how she narrates that same period of time from another point of view. And if we want to see uh, Thomas More portrayed here as a Jesus figure, especially with the ending and the martyrdom and everything, what Hilary Mantel does with Cromwell in the Wolf Hall is pretty much the same. She talks about him as a man who comes from nothing, with an abusive father, with a man that rise up from nothing. And then there's, from nativity, just like Jesus, we have that. And then there is this almost 30 years gap between what happened to Cromwell and after
After
he
he
becomes
runs
a
away, and when he returns, and he's already
and yeah, and then he
Wolsey's right
becomes
hand man. You don't have
we see this.
you don't have the building of his character. It's same as with A Man for All Seasons. We start with More already next in line for chancellorship. Basically, it's down to between him and Fisher.
You see, this is so amazing. What Hilary Mantel does with Cromwell, that is practically the villain in this movie, is that she made a Jesus figure out of him, and what we have here is Thomas More as a Jesus figure depicted. And I found that really fascinating about a same period of time, but with different narrations, different perspectives, this different point of views, and like how we can look at all these characters separately, and we can justify them. We can find a reason to justify their characters, the way that they behave, who chose to lie, who chose to live, and who chose to like stay true to his dignity or morality, or because just like what you said, for
They're
some
both
he
martyrs. They're both martyrs.
they're both, you see, they're both are, because both of them came like fight for something that they believed in. Cromwell fought for what he thought was right, and so I think that is very interesting when we look at that period of time, with and how we can see the history throughout different lenses and how it's shown to us. You know, we are here, we have to believe. It's not how it's shown to us. Especially now that we have like, oh, but among all these things, one thing that I know for sure is this, that Henry VIII, megalomaniac of that this is what happens when you mix
But
with,
he
you
was
see,
loved. He was loved. And he was a beloved king. People thought that he was what a king should be.
that's what I wanted.
It's so interesting because when the two kings that we've done, Becket and we had Henry II, and here we have Henry VIII. Beckett's Henry II was hated in his time. Despite, and we think of him as a good one. We think of him as one of the better kings. I mean, he was the one who created the English law system, whereas Henry VIII, who we think of as a villain who put two of his wives to death, and you know, and formed the first Brexit simply so that he could have a son. And gosh, well, and the list goes on. We talked about in our Becket episode how Henry actually had Becket's shrine at Canterbury dug up, tried his body for treason and threw it in the river. He also, when he dissolved the monasteries, destroyed all the ancient artwork. There's so much, and yet he was loved. He was loved. It was up. The Victorians even loved him. It was really only in the 20th century that people had a different view on him as a megalomaniac and a tyrant.
I can tell you why. Because, imagine that you're going to sell a story in history. Who would you like to hear more about? Someone who can be like the star of a Jerry Springer show, or someone like Henry, like Thomas More?
Yeah, that is true. But now, getting back to Wolf Hall, um, you can have both versions of Thomas More without historical inaccuracies. In Wolf Hall, you have the Protestant fervor, to use an anachronism because Protestantism wasn't a word that they used, but the Reformation fever, I guess, that you get from Cromwell is in part revenge for all of the what he sees as his fellow reformers having suffered as heretics under More. Well, there are facts to back that up, but on the other hand, you can use those same facts to look at him as a saintly, more as a saintly figure, who did his best to make sure that people were getting a fair trial in a time when they weren't. So there were 6 people who were put to the stake during Thomas More's time as chancellor for heresy. However, in most of those cases, they were actually treason cases, and Moore's role was merely to make sure that they had a fair trial. So there's no proof that he actually reveled in them the way that Wolf Hall has him, keep going after heretics. But it is an actual charge that he did. Uh, in his Apologia in 1533, he did actually refute charges that he had tortured heretics. And what he said was that he'd only used physical violence twice. Once was against a servant that he'd had. It was a young person who was teaching the Eucharist, and that he'd had them caned, which I guess was perfectly normal way of disciplining children. And then the second he there was a mentally ill person who during the Eucharist was pulling women's dresses over their heads, and he had him whipped, but he claims that was because there was a mob that actually would have lynched him, and that he actually didn't even want to do that. So it was something that was said about him in his lifetime. And then later on in Elizabeth's reign, you get Fox's Book of Martyrs, which lists 6 different martyrs or victims of Thomas More, where he was chancellor. So you can deal with the same set of facts, and if whether you are taking one person's view or the other, you can portray the same person as being, in Wolf Hall's case, a completely evil man stuck in past Catholicism and willing to sacrifice the lives of others for his zeal, or in the case of Robert Bolton, A Man for All Seasons, a saintly figure who is so incredibly devoted to an idea that he's willing to die for it without actually feeling the need to ever express that idea. And that, of course, takes me back to Pauline Kael's criticism of the film, which is that Moore is so incredibly right that you don't even understand what he's right about.
No, what you said. Imagine like the Adam McKay's movie. What was that? Rice, about Dick Cheney. You see,
Which I love that movie, but it's a takedown.
but see, we kind of like Dick Cheney in that film. Rumsfeld, the way that he learns from Rumsfeld and then he surpasses him and rises from. You see, it all
Yeah,
depends on the way.
he's the Cromwell of that in a way.
Exactly. Holy the Cromwell. Right now that you were saying, it just that comes to my mind that, oh my God, that this is totally vice. You can that's the power of filmmaker. They can make you love or hate a character, and it all depends. And that, I think, that goes all to the power of film and the filmmaker, and how they have this, this kind of clay, and how they mold it and how they present it. And that's why people like that's why it matters when they say like, oh, the movies are too woke, oh, there are not many black people in the movies, oh, the representation of LGBTQ, because that matters, because movies has this strong effect on people, and they can be like more like the effect of a movie is stronger than the news, than right now, than a book.
And again, both are historically accurate for what they are, even though they're giving completely opposite stories, just by highlighting different events. You're not you don't read Wolf Hall going, that's not the Thomas More that I know. You merely are seeing him from a different point of view. You're seeing him from in the beginning Wolsey's point of view, and then from Cromwell's point of view.
here I'm condemned to be in this here in this monastery, and then Thomas More tells him like you're gonna
If I'd
die
served my
from
if
the
I'd
natural
served my God, if I'd served my God as well as I served my king, he would not have left me here to die.
see. So which is like, be happy that you're here and you're not in the tower and you're dying from natural causes
Yeah,
with your head
it was
at the
Norfolk. It wasn't Moore. It was Norfolk who came to collect the chain of office.
I'm sorry. Exactly. And then the chain, another symbolism that we have, and the chain. And okay, now that we're here, I think we can talk the amazing, incomparable, the man for all season to me, Orson Welles, that he owns the picture, any picture that I mean, you're not going to believe it, but I love this 60s, 70s Orson Welles. This huge Orson
Well,
Welles.
he wasn't actually that fat, you know. He was wearing a fat suit. He didn't really
But
gain
he was.
that weight until in mid 70s, until those wine commercials and what have you. That was and as you pointed out, Wells did his own makeup, you know.
Yeah.
And that was a fake nose, and like I said
His
before,
voice.
yes. Oh my God. Well, and that opening scene is, well, not opening scene, but that scene between him and Scofield is a lesson in cinematic versus theatrical acting, because Orson Welles steals that scene right out from under Scofield. You know, you're a constant disappointment to me, Thomas. You know, and talking, and it's so interesting because it's like he has a toothache or something, you know. The way he has to stress each syllable. Plod her, we plod, you know. It's, oh my God, it's so brilliant, you know. And yeah, I recently saw the
He's dead.
trial.
Orson Welles' trial. Oh, that's
Terrible movie,
like that.
but
That's
horrible
he's
movie. But he's great in it, and it's the
he's
same
great.
thing.
He's great in everything he's in. And I mean, the death scene. The death scene, when I was thinking that he's dead. And that question, that what are you gonna say for yourself? I thought that it's kind of like a flippant kind of question. Like, now that you're dead, do you have to say it? And then the dead body started to talk. That was, what a beautiful scene.
Well, and
And then,
Zimmerman has a great moment there as a director, because of course you get you see Norfolk through Wolsey's point of view upside down, because he's laying upside down. The camera flips over, and you get that kind of tunnel vision, and that's a great moment of directing, because you know, whereas a traditional director would just have kind of a coverage shot, you know, a wide shot, and then split between the two. He is actually expressing how, not only how Wolsey feels, but how we feel as an audience about the events that are going on, because you know, we feel that bit of upside down, you know, because what the hell is going to happen now that Wolsey's dead, you know? Because this guy's been set up as our major baddie, and if we don't know history, we're going to think, oh, well, they killed off Orson Welles, and we're only 10 minutes into the movie. What's going to happen now?
very Hitchcock, right? Like, they killed the two, like the Hollywood actor that we think that matters more. Like, that's what I'm telling you. And I was thinking why he is not
But
Henry VIII.
but the scene is brilliantly directed. I mean, from a cinematic point of view, just absolutely
Very,
brilliantly, and not in the play. The whole scene is created
yeah.
just
Those
for the film.
black. Who are they? That they're like singing and singing something praying for him, those figures, those guys, like dressed in black, very like look very medieval, surrounding him, praying for him, and they're so scary. The fear on that scene and that the dialogue, everything, and he started to like blabble something. I couldn't even understand what he was saying, but like the words of a dying man that doesn't even matter, but they should matter. These are the words of a dying man, and we don't even hear them clearly, and they don't matter at all. A political character. He was someone for himself. And look what happens. That's what I'm saying about the foreshadowing at the beginning of the film is so good. The film, from the narrative point of view, I think everyone can, like, I can argue that everyone can say, like, yeah, it's boring, it's too long, but I argue that they all like a very Socratic debut, and from the beginning till the end to the trial, and every word matters. Everything that says in the film matters for the film. Like, if we're not looking at it from the historic point of view, but for the film, in the frame of the film. I said it in Clubhouse, the way that if we have a passive protagonist, have a very active, strong antagonist as Cromwell to raise him up, to provoke him, to make the movie go on, to push the story forward. So beautiful.
Well, and Scofield's performance throughout this is, which he won the Academy Award for, and of course he played on stage, and what have you. And I've seen many different actors do this, and most recently I saw Charlton Heston do this in his made-for-TV version, which Heston actually tried very, very hard to unseat Scofield from this part that basically was Scofield's part. But I always will I will always compare whoever to Scofield. He is Thomas More to me, just as Henry II is now Peter O'Toole.
No, exactly. I mean, look, let's accept that Peter Scofield was born to live this role. He made the role for Broadway, for West End, for he he created this character, and he has it, we see it in his eyes, in the trial scene at the end, and that
He was the original radio play.
he
He
really
did.
was in a radio play. Oh, I can
Yep,
imagine.
it started as a radio play.
His voice, his beautiful voice. He's perfect for the role. Another
He
thing
could have been a movie star. He chose not to. He could have been a movie star. He chose not to because he was a very private person and he just didn't want to deal with, he said he didn't want to live Richard Burton's life or have Richard Burton's liver.
I think we have to say, talk about what happened at the Oscars, that he didn't even come to the Oscars because he was pretty sure that he's going to lose to Richard Burton for Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. But then the story that he was gardening in his garden. He was like doing his own thing, like planting some, and then his wife told him that you just won the Academy.
Well, Anthony Hopkins for the father a couple of years ago. Of course, that was during a COVID pandemic, and he was an 80-year-old man. But yeah, same thing. He was in bed asleep and found out the next morning and had to basically upload a TikTok video or something.
And because he was pretty sure that he's going to lose to Chadwick Boseman, I think. Everyone was thinking
Yeah. As a matter of fact, and he had I thought he was going to lose to Chadwick Boseman.
But
And
one more thing about Orson Welles is that Orson Welles in this film reminded me of Sean Connery in Robin Hood, Prince and Thief. It's just this 5-minute appearance and gone. That's it.
well,
And
but he's set up so centrally that even with, and I sure you know I have a pretty good knowledge of history. I really thought when I was watching this the first time, when whatever I was 13 or 14 or whatever, that this was going to be a film about Wolsey and Moore going to war. I did not have any concept that, because why would you bring Orson Welles in, you know, to kill him a scene later? I had no concept that this was going to be about Moore as Chancellor of England. I thought it might end with Wolsey's death and Moore becoming Chancellor, because you're set up to believe that, because he is, you and I are enemies. Yeah, it seems like it's foretelling what the plot's going to be, and then the rug gets completely pulled out from under you, and his assistant Cromwell, who you've seen lurking in the dark and taking messages for him, becomes the antagonist.
that goes back to what we were saying about the power of the movie and what the filmmaker chooses to show us, and the what he's trying. What I love. I wanted to say the message, but the other thing about the movie that is so amazing is that the movie is not trying to be like messagey or have a message, but it's about exploring this period of time, but from not like I just said, it's easier to sell the movie if it was focused on Henry VIII, but he chooses a character, a different character, and he focuses on that to say different things and to explore that period of time in a different way. And I think
Well,
that's so beautiful to
let's
say.
let's let's take a break for a sec, because you mentioned the Oscars, and talk about one of the things one of the few things I actually have notes on.
The amazing
uh,
1966 movies.
yeah, 1966 in film, because 1966 is probably my favorite year in movies, and I'm just going to list off all the movies that are in my collection that I used to own either on VHS or later on Blu-ray, that came out in 1966, and which luckily, you see, I actually still have an old Word file where I had them cataloged, so I was able to go through and find them, but. My probably favorite film of all time, Luis Buñuel's Simon of the Desert, came out in '66.
My
Ingmar Bergman's Persona came out in 1966.
Antonioni Bob.
Until Blow Up, yep, the '66. Any one of those three would probably be in my at least top 15, top 20 films of all time. You had mentioned Mike Nichols' version of Edward Albee's Who's Afraid of the Virginia Woolf, which I haven't seen in probably 20 years, but I definitely did own on video and watched several times back then. Another one, Sidney Pollack's This Property Condemned with Robert Redford.
Like Michael Caine, Alfie.
We'll get to the British films. I haven't even gotten to British films. But like, look, in France, we had Lelouch's A Man and a Woman. We had Robert Bresson's I Was Our Balthazar. Rene Clement's Paris Burning. Dubraca's The King of Hearts. Alain René's Le Grasse Fini, which not only is that one of my favorite films, it's also a film that's Hollywood actually remade with Richard Gere. But Godard's Made in the USA was that year. Jeremy's Signor Signoria was that year. Fellini's Juliet of the Spirits. Marco Bellaccio had Fist in the Pockets, and he also had one of my favorite films of all time, definitely in my top 10, The Organizer with Marcello Mastroianni was that year. Sergio Leone's The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly was that year. Pasolini had The Hawks and the Sparrows, which to my mind was his last great film. And after that, I think he just became camp. But Pontecorvo's The Battle of Algiers was that year. Tarkovsky's and Andrei Rublev was that year. War and Peace, the big Russian version, was that year. Over in America, you also had Arthur Penn's The Chase, Sidney Lumet's The Group, Francis Ford Coppola's first film, You're a Big Boy Now, was that year. And then just in Britain, you mentioned Alfie, but we also had Georgie Girl, Martin Ritt's The Spy Came In From the Cold, which I have seen probably a dozen times at least in my life with Richard Burton.
And one more thing I think is important that we have to say is that still in 1966 in the Oscars, there were the cinematography for black and white movie was given a different award than the color.
Yeah, the Haskell Wexler for that was the last time.
It's so big, and I think I wish that still existed.
Well, there aren't enough black and white movies, honey. You'd have years where they just didn't have or one black and white movie would come out and it would get the award by default. So, but I'm almost done with my list. But I'm not a big fan of Joseph Losey and Harold Pinter films, but I did own The Servant, and I haven't seen it in many, many years. But I must have liked it because I do remember my VHS copy got worn from having watched it too many times and had a spot where it skipped. But that was also the year Francois Truffaut adapted Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451. You also had the great Michael Caine thriller Funeral in Berlin. Richard Lester of A Hard Day's Night fan made a funny thing happen on the...
One moment, I have to say, Fahrenheit 451 is one of my favorite movies of all time.
Oh, it's an excellent movie. I love that movie. The humanism of that film is it's like Thomas More directed a movie. It's that kind of humanism.
You know how relevant it is till today, like that we are banning books in Florida. Just please. People.
Well, and or the drugs in that, or that was the very first film I can remember that had drug addiction as being a central point, and that of course is wonderful film.
Servant, you just said you don't like his, but Servant.
I don't know if I like it. I don't generally like Joseph Losey and Harold Pinter, but I must have loved it. I just don't remember it very well. Yeah, see, it's going to be a rewatch. You know what? Maybe we'll do it for UK cinema history because then we can talk about Harold Pinter. We can talk about the American expatriate Joseph Losey, and that of course bring us into the HUAC and the Hollywood blacklist. So it'd make for an interesting episode whether I like the film now or not. So maybe that's one we should do.
Tell me one thing. Vanessa Redgrave was nominated for a movie.
Morgan, A Suitable Case for Treatment. Carl Rise, which I did own, and that was actually on my list. Actually, I only had two more, and the other was Powell and Pressburger's second to last film, They're a Weird Mob, which they made in Australia. Which, not a great film, but I owned it. I owned anything that was Powell and Pressburger. I that you could get on video. I had on video. But anyway. And that's just my collection. If you go into other people's collections, 1966 was just a great fucking year for movies.
I think what is interesting to me was that Russians Are Coming, Russians Are Coming was nominated for Best Picture because we don't see the same amount of attention to comedies or
Norman Jewison, yeah, who's in the Heat of the Night would win 2 years later. Uh, so
and
you know,
we have the young Alan Arkin. Oh,
oh, I honestly think that's a stupid movie, and the fact that it got nominated in a year that had so many great films is, I think, a disgrace to the Academy. Honestly, I thought that was if I were Carl Reiner, I would take my name off of that film. I thought it was just an awful, stupid
because
movie.
that's what I wanted to say. I wanted to say, I among all these movies that you just mentioned, please just say, do Sand Pebbles or like Alfie or Russians Are Coming, Russians Are Coming. Are these the movies that deserve to be on Best Picture?
Yeah, we're
Or do
not going to have that conversation though,
yeah,
because every year with the Oscars we can say that. You know, I they
say
aren't
there is
they aren't a harbor. Number one, they're in that time because if you think about it, A Man for All Seasons I think was the fifth highest grossing film of 1966. You know, and the other films nominated were number 3, 5, 7, etc. You know, I mean, these were the top grossing films that year. The films that I'm talking about, like Morgan: A Suitable Case for Treatment, maybe 100,000 people even saw that. And
to talk about
Persona, greatest film of Ingmar Bergman's career, in my opinion. But Ingmar Bergman, if 10,000 people saw one of those films, that was considered a great financial success. So, you know, you in that time and of that time, the Oscars aren't, you know, you don't have the knowledge that we have in hindsight of what films are going to last and what films aren't.
another interesting thing about the Oscar that year was that uh the writers and the actors guild was on a strike just like today, and I think and it was
They,
on the yeah,
they almost
they
had to change the
they had
date.
to
Yeah,
supervise or not.
they almost had to change the date.
Yeah, they had to change the date. So see, 96 and 7.
Well, and you had three of Michael Redgrave's kids nominated in the same year, which that was a first. You know,
To mention
so
a sci-fi. I have to mention a sci-fi on 1966. Fantastic Voyage. Forgot
oh
about
well, oh yeah, it's nice
and
cleavage. I mean, nice sci-fi.
I love that movie. I think
Oh,
that's
it's a great movie, and it holds up today. I watched it in high def, which you would think, like, if you watched like Star Wars before George Lucas monkeyed with it in high def, the painted backdrops and everything would make it laughable, you know. But which is why George Lucas had to go and digitize everything. But I was watching Fantastic Voyage, and it looks, just because of the practical effects, it looks just as good as it probably did back then.
isn't it? That's a very good movie. We had to like I had to mention that too. So and I think
Okay,
that
I got that off my chest because I had very few notes for this episode. I
please
had that and the long more quote that I did about Richard Rich were the entirety of my notes.
please go ahead about Richie Rich. What are you gonna say about Richie Rich?
Well,
You don't like the
I don't. I listen to the History of England, which is a David Crowther's podcast, yeah, and there are about, I think, 400 episodes, and he spent ooh, at least 5 years talking about the Tudors on that podcast, and for a weekly basis, because Rich was around for so long through Henry's reign, Mary's reign, and Elizabeth's reign. I heard of Richard Rich, you know, week after week after week, and every time it's just like, oh, what's that crazy kid up to now? And it was always the most scumbag thing. It was, he was always leading troops in rebellion, or suppressing a rebellion, or fighting to burn heretics in Mary's reign. I mean, just and I just have to ask myself, a guy who got that much bad press, because we don't know what actually happened, right? History's always told by the winners, I just wonder, is there another side to that? Because, with a few exceptions, like Jim Jones, or Charles Manson, bad people generally don't think that they're doing bad. Am I right?
Of
And
course.
I wonder what, so when we look at Rich as he's portrayed here, and as history has portrayed him as being an opportunist, was that his only thing, or was there more to it? I asked myself that, and I half jokingly said, there's a book to be written with the hagiography of Richie Rich that's never been done.
What I can say about that is that I love how John Hurt played the character again on the trial scene. The look that he gives, and the complexity of the character is that this is a character who, no, you are an actor. You have to play. You have to become another character, and that character is lying and trying to act that, no, I'm not lying, I'm telling the truth. It's like an actor playing something that role is playing something else. That I think John Hurt, as like the young
And yet
actor
he
that
was sympathetic, and yet there was some sympathy to him
and
until he commits perjury. Until he commits perjury, you're feeling like I've lost my innocence. You feel like, oh my God, he has lost his innocence. He's lost his way. Poor sheep. Until that perjury, you don't really see him as the oily bad guy that he is.
and Sela said that on Clubhouse. He said he begs more. He says it.
Employ me.
Exactly. You see, he asks, he says, he literally says, like, please help me here. And I think this is, you know, Thomas More's silence, or what he does, or he wants to stay true to, like, God and King. These are not his hypocrisy. I think this is his flaw. Richie Rich is his flaw. That's where he slipped. That's where he got blinded, or he, like, didn't want to see him. Like, he was too little for him to see him. He kind of like ignored him. And that, I said it in Clubhouse, and then at the end, when we see him in the
Or
trial,
he sensed it, that he just knew he was a bad one.
yeah,
I mean,
but it
some people are just like that. And uh, when you look at John Hurt's portrayal, he, constantly sweaty and oily, and he looks like a guy you can't trust. You just feel you feel it, and you empathize with him because he's got that soft voice, and because he's rather small. I feel like I've lost my innocence, and he's got kind of and he's the only one with a posh accent in this cast, and we love a good podcast or posh accent here on UK cinema history. But he's the only. I feel like I've lost my innocence. Well, if you didn't notice before now,
He
how
is
important could it have been to
slimy.
you?
He is slimy. He's a weasel. But I think he's so slimy, and he is a snake. Like I said it in Clubhouse. Like when you see him wearing that dragon, of with the Welsh symbol of the dragon, you don't see him as a dragon. You see him as a snake. You feel like, oh, so Cromwell allow a snake.
Yeah,
So yeah.
for Wales, Richard, for Wales. I did want to make one other point about this film. When my father died in 2004, I gave his eulogy, and I opened it, with uh, the quote from Thomas More to Richard Rich about becoming a teacher. When Richard Rich says, Thomas More says that you'd make a great teacher, and Richard Rich says, if I was, who would know it? And Thomas More says, your pupil's God, not a bad public that. And then my eulogy was about my father as my greatest teacher. And then I ended it. My children were quite young then, with you were a great dad. You knew it. Your grandchildren will know it. God knows it. Not a bad public that. And that was the end of my eulogy. And I tell this story because to show what an important influence this film had on me. That at that time of grief, and it was my dad died at the age of 56, just way too young. At the time of grief, that was what popped into my head. That's how much this film has meant to me over the years. That's all I had to say about that.
Now, what do you think that is there anything is left to say after what you just said? You just ended it. Like I can't say anything else after that.
Oh, I'm
That was
sorry.
no, that was so beautiful.
Well, I guess I came up with a good ending for it then.
You came up with the best ending for it.
Well, that's
So
beautiful. That's beautiful. I did something good.
you did
Well,
something.
that's great. Well, Sunday we're gonna do if I can't get into Clubhouse, let's do it here because I
Of
actually
course,
like this. If
I kind of like it.
if they haven't fixed it, we'll do if here.
Yeah, if they fix it, we do if.
And but we're gonna do if we're gonna start talking about Lindsay Anderson. That's my way of sneaking around the British New Wave, um, kitchen sink drama, young man conversation without actually putting those films in front of us. I'm gonna be doing 4 films in a row about the English school system, and we're going to start with if Lindsay Anderson's 1968 film about the public school system, uh, and we're going to end with and in between we're going to have 2 comedies to dice it up some because you can't be depressed all the time. So it's my way of kind of sneaking us into social realism. So there we go. So that's our month planned out. Because as you said, Yassi, it's very important to curate this. We can't put this up for election every time. What movie do you want to do next time? It has to be curated.
No, you're saying here, people. We have a saying stronger than Henry VIII. And yeah. This is what we say here. There's no democracy.
Pimp hand strong, yo. Pimp hand strong. That's right. That's right. Yeah. The maestro has spoken. So yeah. So
Because
if on
because
Sunday, like I said, if I can't get in, we'll do it here. But we're gonna do
because
it.
we are true to our convictions. We are true to our convictions. We are true to what and we believe in what we're saying. Yeah.
Because I
Very
believe it. More importantly, because I believe it. I trust I
you
make
do.
myself obscure.
Exactly.
All
So
right.
that
All right. Okay. Much love, Yazzie. You know, I could talk about this film, movie or any movie with you for 40, 50 hours straight. But
means
we've done a
so much.
pretty good job. 2.5 hours on a 2 hour movie. So
This conversations. These are like what I learn every time. I don't know what to say. I really appreciate every second of it, and really, really, I don't know what to say. I just know that nothing. I really don't have words for it. But thank you.
well,
Till next time.
I love having you. As long as there's two of us, there will always be a show. Whether it's on Clubhouse or not is up to them because they have failed me. I ask you because I want to do British cinema. Do they take me for a simpleton, Yazzie? All right. And
No.
on that note, and on that Robert Shaw note,
Sorry. Very
we'll end it. All right. Good
sorry,
night,
sir.
Yazzie.
Want to join the conversation? Every Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we record this on the Clubhouse app. And by following the link in the episode description, you can add your voice to our crowd. Also, since you're listening on a podcast, do all the podcasty things for us. Liking, subscribing, telling your friends, telling your enemies too. They might like good movies. And thank you for being a listener to UK Cinema History.